What happens when a woman who built her fortune from the ground up steps into a palace of glass and gold, only to be treated like an intruder? The sun was sinking low over Savannah, Georgia, casting molten streaks across the towering facade of the Regency Palms Hotel. Inside, chandeliers dripped light like molten diamonds, washing the marble floors in a relentless, blinding glow. The air was thick with the scent of lilies, leather briefcases, and the sharp tang of ambition, each guest a polished masterpiece in silk and tailored linen. Through the revolving doors came a different figure, Sierra Whitaker, her jeans faded, her white blouse creased from travel, her sneakers worn but determined. She moved with the calm precision of someone who knew her worth, even as velvet rope gazes flickered over her, measuring, doubting. Somewhere deep in the opulent maze of the hotel, a gala was preparing to crown the next generation of visionaries. Sierra was meant to be one of them. Yet the way the staff stiffened, the way security shifted in their corners, hinted that tonight the true battle wouldn't be fought with speeches or champagne. It would begin right here, in the marble heartbeat of the lobby. The lobby of the Regency Palms breathed old money and restless ambition. Beneath the vaulting ceilings and glittering chandeliers, servers in crisp black uniforms wove silently between guests, balancing trays of champagne and whispered promises. Sierra Whitaker moved through the gleaming marble expanse like a current against the tide. At 42, she carried herself with an ease born not of privilege, but of battles fought and won behind closed boardroom doors. Her brown skin caught the golden light pouring in through the towering glass windows, a quiet defiance in a room curated for appearances. In her practical jeans and travel-creased blouse, she didn't look like the kind of woman who signed multi-million-dollar innovation grants or sat on the cover of Forbes next to headlines about sustainable revolutions. And today, that was the point. No entourage, no designer labels, no armor but her own conviction. She adjusted the strap of her weathered satchel and scanned the lobby for the man who had promised to meet her here. Cameron, her husband, her partner in every way that mattered. But he was late. And the longer she stood alone, the more the hotel's polished facade began to crack. A concierge's gaze lingered on her sneakers a moment too long. A security guard shifted near the velvet ropes, his radio murmuring something low and sharp. Sierra caught the exchange without needing to hear it. She'd lived this scene 100 different ways, 100 different places. She knew exactly what was coming, but still a small part of her hoped today would be different. Behind her, the hum of the gala preparations swelled. Musicians tuning strings, managers barking into earpieces, the clink of champagne glasses stacking for the evening's wealthiest elite. Sierra could already picture it. The speeches about innovation, progress, equality, all delivered in a place that couldn't see the very future it claimed to celebrate. She pressed her palm against the cool leather of her satchel, grounding herself. Tonight wasn't about appearances, it was about standing in her own skin, unapologetically. A flash of silver caught her eye. The hotel manager, a man in a navy suit so sharply pressed it seemed to slice the air around him, was making his way across the floor, his smile rehearsed, his eyes already calculating. Sierra's instincts flared. This wasn't a welcome committee, this was an inspection. She straightened, not to make herself smaller or softer, but taller, firmer, as if bracing for a storm she could already feel prickling against her skin. The manager's path curved toward her like a blade finding its mark. Across the lobby, a young woman at the check-in desk hesitated, her hand fluttering over the phone. The security guard abandoned pretense entirely and began edging closer. And in that suspended moment, as Sierra stood framed against a lobby designed to filter people like her out before they could step in, she realized the real gala wasn't happening upstairs. It was happening right here, and she was already center stage. Clive Hastings closed the distance with the precision of a man who'd built his career keeping discomfort out of sight. His shoes clicked sharply against the marble, a metronome of judgment with every step. He stopped just short of Sierra, offering a smile polished to a gleam and just as cold. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he said, his voice dipped in false warmth. "May I help you find your way?" His gaze flicked from her worn sneakers to her travel-creased blouse, cataloguing flaws like a jeweler inspecting a counterfeit diamond. Sierra returned his smile with a polite nod, feeling the slow burn of familiarity tightening her chest. "No, thank you. I'm waiting for my husband. He's a keynote speaker at tonight's event." She delivered it evenly, without apology, but she could see the doubt bloom in Clive's eyes, swift and ugly. Behind him, a pair of junior concierges pretended to arrange pamphlets, stealing glances toward the unfolding scene. Clive clasped his hands together, leaning in slightly, his smile sharpening. "Of course. But perhaps you'd be more comfortable waiting across the street. There's a lovely cafe." His words trailed off as if expecting her to immediately comply. Sierra blinked once, slowly, her pulse a steady drumbeat. "I'm fine here, thank you," she said, her voice crisp as dry leaves underfoot. A shadow flickered across Clive's face, annoyance quickly buried under professional detachment. He straightened his cuffs. "We have certain protocols, ma'am. Today's guest list is exceptionally sensitive." The insinuation hung between them, souring the air. Across the lobby, the security guard took a step closer, the radio clipped to his belt, crackling with hushed static. Sierra shifted her stance, grounding herself deeper into the marble floor, refusing to flinch. Clive's smile thinned to a wire. "I'm going to have to ask for your guest credentials," he said, voice dipped in syrupy civility. "Just a formality, you understand." Sierra inhaled slowly through her nose. "My husband will be here momentarily. I'll wait." For the first time, frustration seeped through Clive's mask. His jaw tightened as he glanced toward the front desk, seeking backup that wasn't coming. The junior staff had all conveniently busied themselves, avoiding his eye. He turned back to Sierra, a brittle edge creeping into his tone. "Without verification, I'll have to assume you are not an authorized guest." It wasn't a suggestion, it was a warning. The surrounding buzz of the lobby seemed to dim, voices lowering, attention sharpening. Sierra could feel the heat of 100 hidden stares crawling up her spine. The polished paradise around her had turned into a silent tribunal, and she was standing trial without a defense. A flicker of doubt, sharp and fleeting, pierced her resolve. Had she misunderstood the meeting spot? Was she wrong to wait here? Clive seized on her hesitation like a hawk spotting weakness. He gestured subtly to the security guard. Sierra's heart kicked harder, not with fear, but with a gathering storm she refused to let loose. Yet, the lobby seemed to contract around Sierra, the air thickening until every breath tasted of polished brass and unspoken accusation. Clive's signal had been subtle, but the consequences were immediate. A second security guard emerged from the shadows near the elevators, walking with a purposeful, measured stride. Sierra stood frozen for a beat, feeling the invisible net tightening. Somewhere behind the concierge desk, the manager on duty picked up the phone, murmuring into it while stealing furtive glances in her direction. Sierra's fingers curled slightly around the strap of her satchel, her instincts screaming a warning she couldn't yet name. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It was a machine, polished and polite, designed to remove her without leaving fingerprints. Clive stepped closer, lowering his voice to a confidential murmur that barely masked its threat. "We can avoid making a scene, ma'am, if you'll just accompany security outside." His words pressed down like iron. Sierra met his gaze steadily, masking the churn of emotion roiling under her skin. "I told you. I'm waiting for my husband." Clive's mouth twitched, a flicker of disdain before he smoothed it into practiced sympathy. "Of course you are," he said, the condescension dripping from each syllable. The security guard hesitated, uncertainty flickering across his face. Sierra caught it, the first crack in their seamless facade. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from a rising anger she forced into stillness. Around them, the lobby's rhythm had shifted, the low hum of conversations thinning as guests became voyeurs to the unfolding drama. Some watched openly, others pretending to check their phones while sneaking glances over the screens. A few faces reflected discomfort, but no one moved to intervene. Sierra's mind raced. Cameron should have been here by now. Was she early? Had something changed? Doubt slithered into her thoughts, uncoiling and tightening around her resolve. What if she had misunderstood the plan? What if she was, in their eyes, exactly what they assumed? A woman who didn't belong. Clive mistook her momentary silence for submission. He nodded to the security guard again, this time more insistently. The guard took another step forward, hand resting lightly on the radio clipped to his belt. Sierra's voice, when it came, was low but firm. "I'm not going anywhere." The guard shifted awkwardly, caught between orders and hesitation. Clive's eyes hardened, the false civility dropping away like a mask discarded after a performance. "If you force me to escalate this," he said tightly, "you'll leave us no choice." Sierra's jaw clenched. She was moments from being manhandled out of a place where she had every right to stand. A place that would later claim it valued inclusion, innovation, and progress, so long as it came wrapped in the right packaging. As she locked eyes with Clive, a flicker of something stirred in the crowd. A ripple of uncertainty, of second glances and shifting postures. The room itself seemed to sense the wrongness, a silent tremor running beneath the polished surface. And somewhere beyond the heavy glass doors, change was coming, thundering toward them all. The lobby's heavy glass doors burst inward with a gust of warm air, scattering the muted conversations like startled birds. Heads turned first in irritation, then in collective recognition, as a man strode through the entrance with the calm force of an oncoming storm. Cameron Whitaker cut a striking figure, broad-shouldered in a tailored dark suit, crisp white shirt, undone just enough to suggest a man who led by presence, not pretense. His polished dress shoes struck the marble with sharp, deliberate clicks, each step commanding the room's full attention. Behind him, two event organizers scrambled to keep pace, clutching folders emblazoned with the visionary leader's gala logo. Every eye tracked Cameron's purposeful advance, yet Clive remained oblivious, still zeroed in on Sierra like a hawk circling wounded prey. The security guards faltered, glancing nervously between Sierra and the newcomer. Sierra felt the shift in the air before she even turned, an electric jolt prickling at the back of her neck. She pivoted slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs, as Cameron's gaze locked onto hers. In a single heartbeat, the tightly wound chaos inside her unraveled. Relief, anger, and something fierce and protective passed between them like an unspoken vow. Cameron's pace never faltered. He closed the distance in long, unhurried strides, the tension in the room coiling tighter with every step. Whispers rose around them like a tide. Some guests stiffened, others moved aside instinctively, sensing the recalibration of power without fully understanding it. Clive, finally registering the disturbance, turned, only to find himself staring into the face of a man whose name had graced every major financial publication in the country. The blood drained from Clive's face with such visible force it was almost comical. He straightened reflexively, adjusting his tie with a trembling hand. Cameron didn't spare him a glance. He stopped directly before Sierra, his presence a shield, a statement carved in flesh and bone. "Am I late?" he asked, his voice smooth but edged in steel. "You're right on time," Sierra replied, lifting her chin, her voice steady despite the crackling storm around them. Clive stumbled forward, words tangling on his tongue. "Mr. Whitaker, sir, I had no idea." Cameron turned, finally acknowledging him with a gaze so cold it could have shattered the chandeliers above. "No idea that the woman you were trying to throw out built the technology that powers half your guest list's fortunes." His voice didn't rise, it didn't need to. It sliced clean through the marble grandeur, exposing every crack beneath the glittering surface. The lobby seemed to tilt, the weight of realization slamming into the assembled guests and staff alike. Phones discreetly appeared, cameras blinking red as the moment crystallized into something no PR campaign could erase. Clive opened his mouth, searching for words, but found none. Around him, the staff shrank back, unwilling to be associated with a man already sinking. Sierra stepped closer to Cameron, her hand brushing his in a silent confirmation. The battle was not over, but for the first time all day, the field had tilted in her favor. The aftershocks of the confrontation still reverberated through the gilded lobby as Sierra and Cameron moved toward the grand staircase, leaving behind a vacuum Clive Hastings struggled to fill. He stood frozen for a beat, a man undone not by a single misstep, but by the slow erosion of choices he'd never thought to question. Around him, the staff dispersed without a word, the silence more damning than any reprimand. Slowly, almost mechanically, Clive retreated behind the front desk, his hands trembling as they smoothed papers that no longer mattered. The security guards, now visibly uncomfortable, exchanged glances before quietly slipping away. Later that evening, Clive sat stiffly in the dim office behind the concierge desk, the once familiar space now feeling foreign and claustrophobic. His phone buzzed relentlessly. Calls from upper management, damage control specialists, voices demanding explanations he could no longer manufacture. His career wasn't over, not yet, but the margin for redemption had narrowed to a thread. He dropped his head into his hands, shame bleeding through the layers of curated professionalism he'd spent a lifetime constructing. A soft knock at the door drew him upright. Standing there, framed by the harsh fluorescent hallway light, was Marcus Green, the hotel's regional director, a man whose approval Clive had once coveted more than his own reflection. Marcus didn't step inside, he simply crossed his arms and spoke in a tone that brokered no argument. "You'll finish your contract, no severance, no recommendations, but you'll have a choice." Clive swallowed thickly, throat raw. What choice? Marcus's gaze didn't waver. "You'll work a mandatory 6-month assignment, Community Outreach Division, starting tomorrow." He paused, letting the weight of it sink in. "You'll coordinate partnerships with organizations like the Whitaker Urban Innovation Center. Real people, real consequences, no marble floors to hide behind." The words hit harder than Clive expected. He opened his mouth to protest, but Marcus cut him off with a curt nod toward the lobby beyond. "Or you can resign tonight and walk into the storm waiting outside those doors." Clive looked past Marcus, glimpsing the flashes of cell phone cameras still prowling the edges of the event, waiting for another mistake. He knew then, this wasn't about salvaging his reputation. That was gone. This was about salvaging something deeper, something he wasn't sure he even deserved anymore. The next morning, dressed in a plain polo shirt and khakis, Clive arrived at the Whitaker Center. The building was a stark contrast to the Regency Palms, exposed brick, scuffed floors, laughter echoing from open classrooms. Kids darted past him with paint-streaked hands and mismatched sneakers. A receptionist, young, tired, and kind, handed him a clipboard without a second glance. For the first time in years, no one flinched at his presence. No one measured his worth against a designer label. By midday, he was stacking chairs for a job training seminar, sweat trickling down his back in the Georgia heat. His manicured hands, so used to paper and polished counters, blistered against rough wood. Sierra Whitaker passed through the hallway at one point, offering him a nod, not of approval, not yet, but of acknowledgement. It stung, but it also steadied him. For every chair he stacked, for every floor he swept, Clive felt the old armor crack piece by piece. Redemption, he realized, wasn't a grand gesture or a public apology. It was built slowly, painfully, in moments no one would ever see. And for the first time in a long while, Clive wasn't performing for anyone. He was trying, truly trying, to rebuild something real from the ruins. The ballroom of the Regency Palms shimmered under 1,000 lights, but it wasn't the chandeliers or the glittering gowns that commanded attention now. It was Sierra Whitaker, standing at the center of the stage with Cameron beside her. A quiet storm in a sea of curated perfection. Cameras flashed, not in scandal, but in reverence, capturing the woman who had turned a public humiliation into a public reckoning without ever raising her voice. Sierra took the microphone with a steady hand, her gaze sweeping across the room, meeting the eyes of executives, investors, and influencers who had once looked through her. "Tonight," she began, her voice ringing clear through the vaulted ceiling, "we celebrate vision, innovation, progress. But none of those things mean anything if they aren't grounded in the way we see and treat each other." A hush fell, rippling outward like a stone cast into still water. Cameron stood a step behind her, a silent pillar of support, but Sierra needed no shield. She stood on her own terms now, the battle scars invisible but hard-earned. "It's easy to talk about change in rooms like this," she continued, the corners of her mouth lifting into a knowing smile. "It's harder to live it in the spaces between grand speeches. It's harder to extend dignity to those we're taught to overlook." Across the ballroom, Clive Hastings lingered at the periphery. a shadow among the bright suits and gowns. He didn't shrink away this time. He stood and listened, the words cutting deeper than any formal reprimand ever could. And yet, something in his posture hinted at a man beginning, slowly, painfully, to rebuild. As Sierra's speech wound down, applause swelled, some polite, some thunderous, some simply thoughtful. The world outside the hotel's marble walls was already buzzing. Clips of the confrontation, captured on phones, had exploded across social media. Hashtags bearing Sierra's name trended worldwide. Memes circulated, headlines spun, think pieces ignited. But none of it captured the raw, visceral truth that anyone present could feel. Respect isn't a luxury, it's the foundation. As Sierra and Cameron stepped down from the stage, hand in hand, the crowd surged forward, not just to shake hands, but to listen, to learn. Somewhere deep in the swirling chaos, a journalist leaned over to a colleague and whispered, "This is going to change everything." Maybe it would. Maybe it wouldn't. Sierra knew better than to believe in fairy tales of overnight transformation. Real change was slower, messier. It wasn't captured in a single viral moment. It was built in the long, unseen work of shifting mindsets, one exhausted step at a time. Later, as they exited into the warm Savannah night, Sierra paused on the grand steps, looking out over the city she had once walked through invisible. Cameron squeezed her hand gently, reading the quiet in her eyes. "You did good," he said simply. "We did," she corrected with a soft smile. Then she lifted her face to the sky, letting the night air carry away the last tendrils of the day's battle. She wasn't here for applause. She was here for the next fight, the next mind changed, the next door opened for someone who looked like her. Because the true measure of character isn't how you treat those you admire or fear. It's how you treat those you underestimate. And sometimes, the most powerful revolution begins with a single act of quiet, immovable dignity. If this story moved you, imagine what's still ahead. Hit that like button, subscribe to the X Daily Stories channel, and turn on your notifications. Every week we bring you new stories packed with drama, redemption, and real-world lessons that linger long after the screen fades to black. Don't just watch, be part of the change.